Well, you may be seated. And if you have a Bible, I want to invite you to turn with me to the book of Isaiah, chapter 35. Today we are beginning our Advent series, and we're going to begin by looking at a prophecy from Isaiah, chapter 35. If you have your own Bible, if you want to bring it up on your phone, I want to invite you to turn there. If you want to use the Pew Bible, the Bible that you'll see in maybe the pew or the chair in front of you, I can tell you on that Bible, it's on page 595. Isaiah chapter 35, as we begin the series of Advent. We've kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but I always just like to speak a little bit to what the season of Advent is all about. Because I recognize we have many different people in our congregation that probably come from many different backgrounds. Some of you maybe have grown up in a church where Advent was given a focus, maybe a church context that had a really focus on the liturgical church calendar. And maybe you can remember really clearly speaking of Advent and having this season of your life each year. Maybe some of you, maybe you grew up going to church, but maybe your experience was a little bit like mine. There was a really clear focus on Jesus's birth, on the meaning of Christmas, but maybe this word or this season, Advent, wasn't really emphasized, and part of just this language feels a little unfamiliar to you. Or maybe for some of you, you did not grow up in church. Maybe for some of you, you're kind of new and just exploring some of the things of Christianity and the Christian tradition. And when we speak of Advent, you of course know about Christmas time, but speaking about this season of Advent really feels almost foreign to you. And I recognize we have all those different backgrounds in our church, and so I always like to just take a minute to speak to what Advent is all about. As Pastor Clark mentioned at the beginning of our service, the word Advent, it literally means the arrival or the appearance. It really means the arrival or the appearance of something or someone that is notable. So Advent has typically meant the arrival of someone who is notable. And so for hundreds of years, the Christian church has taken the Sundays leading up to Christmas and called it a season of Advent. And they've taken the season and they've turned their focus backwards, putting their gaze upon the fact that Jesus has come, that there was a first advent of Jesus, remembering the fact that Jesus has come, but also they've used this season to look forward, to remember the fact that Jesus is going to return, to look forward to his second coming, his second advent. And so I've often heard it said, and I've often repeated the fact that Advent is really about celebrating and anticipating. We celebrate the fact that Jesus has come, but we also anticipate the truth that he is one day going to come again. And I have to be honest with you and tell you that it was in this learning to anticipate during the season of Advent that really sparked my passion for this season. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a church context which thankfully taught me a lot about Jesus' first coming. We spent the season of Christmas reminding ourselves that it wasn't just about presents or about many other things that we associate with Christmas time, but it was about Jesus' birth. But it wasn't until a little bit later on in life when I realized that part of our rhythm as the church was to not only look back during this time, but to look forward, to anticipate the fact that we await Jesus' return. This has really grown my love for this season. It's really brought us out of just this kind of commercial Christmas time that we often have that counts down the days to the one big Christmas morning, but it leaves us with something greater that we are longing for, anticipating what is still to come in Jesus' return. And so in this Advent season, we are going to be focusing on joy. We're calling our Advent series Joy to the World. Hopefully maybe last Sunday you picked up our Advent devotional. We're going to have some available later today if you didn't grab one and you want to. But this is all about leading us to celebrate the joy that we currently have because of Jesus' first coming. That there is good news of great joy that is for all people. A joy that is for each one of us day in and day out, no matter what we're experiencing, because Jesus has come. But we also recognize that there is a great, everlasting, eternal joy that awaits us one day when Jesus returns. And so throughout this season, we want to celebrate this joy that we currently have, and we want to anticipate this joy that we still await. And it's this idea of waiting that I want us to begin with today. As we begin this season of Advent, we begin this series of thinking about the joy that we have, I want us to begin by thinking about waiting for joy. I don't know if there's ever been something that you were waiting for, some moment of joy that you were really anticipating. Maybe as a kid you could remember. Maybe even our kids here today can think about this waiting for Christmas Day. Thinking about the Christmas list that you made, all the presents that you're hoping to receive, that anticipation for Christmas morning. Maybe as you get a little bit older, the anticipation's not so much just for Christmas morning, but for Christmas break. Some of our students just look forward to finals being over and having a couple of weeks off from school. Maybe as you've gotten older, it's not so much just about the presents or a break from school. Maybe it's about the time with family and friends. There's certainly things that we wait for outside of the Christmas season, aren't there? We wait for that next promotion, for that next career move. We wait for the right person. We wait for that next season. All of those things that we're waiting for, that we anticipate bringing some joy into our lives. And the question is, well, what do we do in the waiting? What do we do as we wait for this moment of joy that we are hoping for? And that's why I think this prophecy of Isaiah is really helpful for us, because this was a word given to the people of God to help them to wait well. As they were to wait for the joy that was promised them, I think it is helpful for us as we hear this word from Isaiah, and it can instruct us as we wait for the joy that we still are longing for in Jesus' return. So Isaiah chapter 35, I want to read the whole chapter, which is 10 verses for us this morning. Isaiah says that the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals where they lie down, the grass shall become reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Now, before we examine this text, this prophecy that's before us, I'll just give you a little bit of context. This is spoken by the prophet Isaiah, who prophesied during the 8th century BC. He was probably 700 to 740 years before Jesus came, preaching to the people of Israel. And much of his message is warning about a coming judgment. In fact, if you read the chapters leading up to chapter 35, you'll find that most of them speak to a judgment that was going to come, that God is sovereign, and that in his sovereignty, he was going to bring judgment on all the nations. But he was also going to bring judgment on the nation of Israel, his people, because of their continued sin. But here in chapter 35, as this section of prophecy kind of comes to an end, he does not end with a message of coming judgment, but rather he ends with a message of coming joy. It was a message that was, I think, meant to give hope and strength to the people of God as they waited. It was a message that was supposed to give them hope and joy as they were going through these times of judgment. I mean, if you just keep reading in chapter 36, you see the judgment already begin to happen. You see the difficult times already come to them. And so he's giving them this word to say, here is how you are to continue to live as my people as you wait. Here's how you are to continue through these trials and these difficult times. And so this is why I think this is an important word for us today, that as we look around our world, we think about all that we are experiencing, as we are waiting for a coming joy when Jesus returns. What can this prophecy teach us about waiting for joy? Well, first I want us to consider the prophecy that is before us. And I want to ask, what is being promised in this prophecy? As Isaiah speaks these words to these people, there's a lot of imagery that's being used. So what is the imagery describing? What is being promised in this word of prophecy? And there's three components of this prophecy, of this promise, that I want to lay out before you today. You can kind of think of them as three parts of the picture that is being painted by Isaiah in this prophecy. So the first part of the picture that Isaiah is painting is he is describing what is really a restored world. So the first component of this prophecy, of this promise that I think we are to take away, is that there is going to be a restored world. If you read Isaiah chapter 35, we'll look at just a couple of verses in a moment, but all throughout it is talking about deserts, and it's talking about wilderness, and it's talking about dry lands. But it's saying that there's going to be a time whenever there's going to be streams and water, and there's going to be blossoms. Look at the first two verses of the prophecy. He says that the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. I wasn't expecting to use the word crocus in my sermon today until I picked this text. He says that it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. All this description here is of really like beautiful, fruitful life. The crocus is this flower, this plant that he's describing to describe the life that is going to come. When he speaks of Lebanon and Carmel and Sharon, these were areas not known to be deserts or wilderness. They were known to be places of lush, abundant fruit. So he is saying all the places that have been dried up, all the places where there is no life will experience life. All the places where there's only dry and desert land, they are going to experience water and blossoming and fruit. And I think what he's describing here is not just a change of physical scenery. He's not just describing an end to a drought or a change of the natural landscape. I mean, notice how verse 2 ends, that these lands shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. What he's really describing here is the way that the whole world is going to be restored. He's using the image of deserts and wilderness coming to life to describe the way that our whole creation is going to one day be restored to how it was designed to be. You see, when sin entered our world, it affected all of our creation. The reason that we have sicknesses and illnesses and the reason that we have natural disasters and all the problems in our world are all related to sin coming into our world. And in fact, I find this to be a really great connection point with those who maybe aren't Christians or don't believe the Bible. A lot of people may not believe that there's a God. They may not have the same definition of sin that we do, but most everybody could agree that there's something wrong with our world. Most people would look around and say, something's not quite right. Well, Christianity actually has an answer for why this is the case. It's not just random occurrences. It is actually the way that sin has affected all things in our world. Christianity not only has an answer as to why our world is the way that it is, but it also has a promise that one day God is going to make all things new, that one day all things are going to be restored. That one day all of creation will be restored to how God originally designed it to be. That there won't be places of death or there won't be places of desert, but everything will spring to life. And it's not only about the natural world coming back into restoration, but even the social world. That people will be restored. That it is an idea that all of the social injustices, all of the evils, all of the fighting, all of the wars, will end, that there will truly be peace on earth. You see, he's not just talking about a general kind of vague restored world, but he's also talking about a redeemed people. This is the second part of the picture that I want to make sure you grasp this morning that Isaiah is painting for us. He is saying there's going to be this restored world, that all of creation, all of the broken parts that sin has affected are going to be restored, but not only in general creation, but specifically humanity. Humanity is going to be restored. Humanity is going to be redeemed. We are going to be rid of all that ails us. And notice how he describes this, like in verse 5. He says that the eyes of the blind shall be open, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. What he is saying here is that all that plagues humanity is going to one day come to an end. That all of these things that happen to our bodies, that prevent our bodies from acting as they were created to act, they will one day be removed. It's going to be like streams breaking forth in the wilderness. It's going to be part of this whole restoration of all things. But it's specifically going to be for humanity being restored, being redeemed. Not just being rid of our physical ailments, of our illnesses, of our anxieties, of our depressions, of our social issues, but something even deeper, that we are going to be saved from our sin. That there's this language here of the people and all of their sin and all of the judgment that Isaiah has been speaking about throughout his prophecy. All of the reasons why God is going to be bringing judgment upon the nations and upon the nation of Israel, it is one day all going to be removed. That one day all these people are going to be redeemed. Notice the language towards the end of the prophecy, like at the end of verse 9, and it's speaking about the way that the people are walking on this way of holiness. And it says in verse 9 that the redeemed shall walk there. That there's this idea that the people who are walking on this highway are people who have been brought out of something, purchased out of something. They are going to be redeemed. In verse 10, he says that they are the ransomed of the Lord. There is this idea that all of humanity is going to be restored, rid of not just physical ailments, but the sin that separates us from God. And see, all of this is in the language of really returning to God. That's why I do want to make something really clear as we talk about all these problems in our world. We talk about the world being restored, the humanity being redeemed. It's really important to note that God's not doing all this from a distance, if you will. The language here is not like God is taking his creation and kind of from an arm's length, just putting the world back together. Or if he's just kind of rescuing a people kind of outside of himself. All the language is the fact that God is bringing all things back to him. You see, as many problems as we have in the world, as many natural disasters, as many social issues, as much violence and harm we have in the world, these are real problems, but they're actually really the symptom of the problem. Really, the root of the problem is that the creation has been separated from its creator. There's a distortion in that we were created to bear the image of God, but that's been distorted in us because we no longer are in right relationship with the one who we were created by. And God is making it clear that as he is doing all this work, it is going to come by the people returning to him. And that's the last part of this picture that I want you to see is a joyous return. He's speaking about a world that's being restored, and he's speaking about a humanity that's being redeemed, a redeemed people, a restored world, that all of it is happening as there is this return to him. There's this language throughout this passage, especially at the end, of really kind of a homecoming, if you will. A lot of times coming home is kind of a theme at Christmas time. Find a lot of movies and shows that kind of tap into this idea of getting to come home at Christmas, getting to be with family. What's actually tying into one of the great truths of Christmas, that Christmas really is about being brought home. It is about coming to a place of rest. But notice how it's being described here in the very last verse, in verse 10. It says that the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Zion was the city of God. So it's a description of the way that the people are coming back to the presence of God. And as they do so, it is a joyous return. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Now you kind of have to ask yourself, where are the people coming back from? I mean, he says that they are returning to Zion, the city of God, but where were they? Actually, at this time, the people that Isaiah are prophesying to are probably still in Jerusalem, the city of God. So why is he describing a time in which they are going to return? Well, you see, that really plays into understanding how is this prophecy going to be fulfilled? Because there's many people who look at this prophecy and they would say, well, you know what? In the coming years, in the coming centuries, the people of Israel would be taken away from their homeland. They would be brought into exile as a part of the judgment of their sin. And they would spend some years away from their homeland, but one day they would return from exile. They would come back to the promised land. And this is what Isaiah is speaking about. He is speaking about their return from exile. And I think maybe in part there are some truths to that Isaiah is warning the people of this coming judgment and how they will be removed from their homeland, but one day they will come back. But I think there's something even greater being prophesied about here. I mean, you think about it, when he speaks about all of the creation being restored, when he speaks about all of the people being ransomed and redeemed and having an everlasting joy, it seems to be something maybe even greater than just coming back to Jerusalem from a time in exile. In fact, I think there's a part of the prophecy that lets us know a little bit about when it's going to be fulfilled. Do you notice in verse 4, when it talks about to strengthen those who have an anxious heart, to be strong and fear not. Why? Because your God will come with a vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Notice the promise is not just the fact that the people will return to God on their own, but rather that God will go to his people. And it's not just that the fact that the people have found their way back to God, but that God has gone to his people. He has gone to them. He has saved them. He is bringing them home. And isn't this what we celebrate at Christmas time? Isn't the baby in the manger God who took on flesh and dwelt among us? Aren't we remembering the fact that our God has come to save us? Aren't so many of the words of this prophecy fulfilled when Jesus came? Didn't he open the eyes of the blind? Didn't he make the lame to walk? Didn't he ransom and redeem a people through his shed blood and his resurrection? All of these promises are being fulfilled as Jesus comes, 700 years after Isaiah had spoken, but coming in this Messiah that we remember and that we celebrate. But aren't there some parts of this prophecy that we kind of sense are still waiting to be fulfilled? When we talk about all of creation being restored, we look around our world and we would say, it seems like God is still doing that work. When we talk about people having everlasting joy, being in the presence of God forever, doesn't it seem like that is a prophecy we are in a sense still waiting for? I believe what Isaiah is speaking of here was fulfilled in many ways in Jesus' first coming, but I think it will be completely fulfilled when Jesus returns. And this is why it's an important word for us today, because much like those people in those times, we are still waiting. Now we get to be on the other side of the first advent, and we get to wait a little bit differently, but yet we are still waiting in a sense for this joy that is promised to us. How can we wait well? Well, now I want to ask the question, what was this prophecy meant to produce? Why did Isaiah, by the Spirit of the Lord, give this prophecy to the people? What was he hoping to conjure up, to draw up in them as they were to wait? What was it going to produce in the people of God? 3 descriptions that I want to give you that I hope will be apt for us as the people of God as we wait. 1, I think this prophecy, this promise was given to produce a strengthened people. This prophecy, I think, was given by Isaiah to strengthen the people of God as they wait. There's language throughout here, specifically of those who need to be strengthened. And this is a word for us today. Notice in verse 3, when he says, strengthen the weak hands, make firm the feeble knees, say to those who have an anxious heart. You just pause there and you think about those descriptions. Weak hands, feeble knees, an anxious heart. Surely we can understand why the people of Israel might be experiencing these things. Again, if you just read in chapter 36, you'll see the advancements of foreign nations coming into their land. We know all that they were going to walk through and the ways that it might bring anxiety, weakness in them. And in many ways, I would say the same for our world today. If we look around what is happening in our world, it would make sense for many of us to be anxious. Look around what's happening in our world, it would make sense for many people to feel weak in the hands and knees. And that's just our world in general. I mean, think about what's going on in your life personally. Maybe many people here today are going through a difficult season, a difficult circumstance that would be likely for them to be anxious about what is to come next. They find it difficult to wait for Jesus' return because of all that they are facing. This prophecy is given to strengthen those who are finding themselves anxious and weak. And notice that the prophecy about being strengthened is not about strengthening yourself. The call is not to strengthen yourself, to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. The call is to be strengthened by casting yourself upon the Lord. It says, be strengthened, fear not, because your God is coming to save you. And what a blessing it is for us to live on this side of the first advent. That we are not awaiting the coming Messiah, but that we get to look back and celebrate that our Messiah, our Savior, has come. We get to know that he has begun the work of redeeming a people for himself. We know that he has cleansed us from all of our sin and unrighteousness. We know that nothing can separate us from from his love. What a strengthening reality that is. We as the people of God, I think we need to be strengthened in these days. Strengthened to continue in the work that he has called us. Strengthened to continue in the message that he has called us to proclaim to others. But this is not a strengthening in and of ourselves, but we are strengthened by the fact that our God has come and he has saved us. He has strengthened us that we might live as his people. Which really goes to, I think, the second call this is meant to produce in the people of God. This prophecy is meant to produce a strengthened people. It is also meant to produce a sanctified people. A people that are set apart from the world. This prophecy was given to not only give the people of God resolve for the things that they face, in just a vague sense, but it's really to give them a resolve to live as the people of God, to be sanctified, set apart as the people of God. You'll notice that there's this language in returning to God of this highway. It's a path that the people are going to walk on, and it's called the way of holiness. And I believe it is describing the process of salvation of the people of God as they are coming into the presence of their God. You read it with me in verse 8. It says, a highway shall be there. The people of Israel would have known the highway well, as it would have led them to Jerusalem for those annual feasts. But this one's not just leading them to the temple for an annual feast. It is leading them to the presence of God, and it is the way of holiness. And because it is the way of holiness, the unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. I think, again, this is describing the process of salvation of the people of God. And I think there's a word of warning and there's a word of comfort in here. I want you to hear the word of warning, that he says that the unclean shall not pass over this way. The unclean shall not walk along the way of holiness. This is a holy path leading to a holy God. Therefore, those who are unholy cannot walk on it. So the question is, well, who are the unclean? Who are the unholy? Is it those who never go to church? Those who don't give enough? Those who don't do enough? Actually, the Bible makes it really clear that all of us on our own are unclean. That all of us in our best religious efforts, our most moral actions are really still unclean before a holy God. But Jesus makes a promise to his disciples. He says, you are already clean because of what I've spoken to you in John 15. He says that you can be cleansed from all your sin and all your unrighteousness if you will confess your sin and trust in me. See, there's a word of warning that if you are here today and you've never trusted in Jesus, that you are still outside of this way. You are still outside of what God is doing to restore all things, but there is an invitation that you can be made clean, that you can be brought on this way of holiness, not by your own efforts and resolve, but all because of what Jesus has done in his first coming. If you would trust in him, you would be made clean and brought onto this way, but then notice that there is this word of comfort. He says that this is a journey to walk on this highway of holiness. And he gives some protections that the lion won't be there and the unclean won't be there. But notice what he even says at the end of verse 8. He says, it shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. Can I get an amen from somebody this morning? Like, does anybody ever feel like a fool? Does anybody ever sin and stumble in your path to holiness? He is saying, for those that have trusted in Jesus and who have been made clean, no matter how foolish and misguided they are, no matter how many times they stumble and they sin and they falter, I am going to keep them on this path. You see, this whole process of being sanctified, of growing to look more like Jesus, is not something that you have to trust in yourself for. This whole walk, this whole journey on the process of getting to the presence of God on this highway of holiness, your hope is not in and of yourself that you can stay on this path. Your hope is in the fact that the one who placed you on the path will keep you there. That the one who has already come, is going to come again, is going to hold you fast and bring you home. It doesn't mean we are to be idle. We are to be on this journey of holiness. We are to be growing to look more like Jesus each and every day. We are to be sanctified as the people of God. So as we wait, we are not to be an idle people. We are to be strengthened specifically to live as the people of God, to be set apart from the world. And so I ask you this morning, is there a call that God's giving you today of how he wants you to be sanctified? Is there a step along this path that he is calling you to take? Maybe it's a sin that so easily entangles, that is causing you to be foolish and go astray at times. Is he calling you to repent from that sin? Would you do so today? Maybe there is an action he is calling you to grow in your love for God, to grow in your love for people as a part of the sanctification journey. How is he calling you to be sanctified today? He is giving us this word that as we wait, we would be a strengthened people, we would be a sanctified people set apart from the world. And lastly, I think he wants us to be a singing people. The last thing that I think this is meant to produce, a component in God's people that I think this is meant to produce, is that it wants to produce a singing people. That might sound kind of strange, but if you read this passage, you're going to see this emphasis on singing all throughout it. First, at the beginning, the deserts begin to sing as life is found there. Then, as people are restored, it says that those who were once mute now sing for joy. And then, as the people are walking along this highway of holiness, as they are making their journey to be with God forever, they are singing. It says in verse 10, the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. This is a personal word for me because my wife tells me I sigh too much. My sighing needs to get replaced by more singing. Not because I'm a really good singer, but because this is the expression of joy for the people of God. This is what I want to call us to as a singing people. Not just that we would come to a carol concert tonight or just that we would sing Christmas songs, but that we would be a joyful people. That we would not just be a people who are waiting for joy, but we are a people who are waiting with joy. Because Emmanuel has come. Our God has redeemed us. because we have been placed on this path of holiness by his work. We are held there by his hand. We can rejoice. And this isn't the type of singing that just acts like everything's okay and puts a smile on their face when everything's not. I mean, I do think there's this message about Christmas in our world today that almost just seems to kind of be like an escape from reality. Like there's this Christmas miracle, there's this great things that can happen at Christmas time, but it's all these kind of empty promises that just try to bring you out of the real world for a brief moment. That's not what I'm trying to describe when I speak about a singing people. I'm speaking about a people that look honestly at the difficulties, the pains, the sorrows in our lives and in our world, and to be able to be, as Paul says, sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. To have a deep-rooted joy in our lives because of the fact that Jesus has come, and because we know that he is going to come again. A type of singing and rejoicing that looks at the darkness of our world and says, the light has come into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. We are to be a people, even in the midst of our sorrow, even in the midst of our difficulty, who are joyful and singing. And this is what I want us to be as the people of God, not just in the Advent season, but in every season of life as we await for his return. Because of the joy that has come and the joy that is still to come, we can be a people who not only wait for that joy, but who can wait with a great joy. Would you pray with me?